The world of cryptocurrency is not a straight road paved with easy riches, but a labyrinth of shadows where fortune and ruin walk side by side. It is a place where numbers rise and fall like tides, where patience is tested, greed is punished, and discipline decides who survives. Many enter hoping to strike gold overnight, only to discover that the market is a storm that devours the unprepared. Yet within that storm, there are those who endure, men and women who learn from loss, sharpen themselves through failure, and move unseen while others fall. This is the story of one such man who began with nothing but hunger, mistakes, and sleepless nights, and who would come to be known not by name, but by presence. A shadow shaped by scars, a traitor invisible yet unyielding. His journey is one of obsession, pain, resilience, and growth. A journey that shows what it truly takes to stand in the storm and not be broken. Now let's begin with Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The Spark in the Shadows. The city's nights had a peculiar silence, the kind that carried whispers of things unseen. He sat by the glow of his old laptop, eyes fixed on numbers that rose and fell with relentless rhythm. The charts flickered like constellations across a digital sky, each candle a star telling a story. Long before the world outside had woken to the wild promise of cryptocurrency, he was already drawn into its orbit. At first, it was nothing more than curiosity, a strange corner of the internet where people spoke about digital gold and anonymous transactions. But curiosity soon became obsession, and obsession became his way of life. He was not yet the invisible trader. He was only a young man with too little money, too many doubts, and too much hunger for something greater than the life laid out before him. His friends laughed when he tried to explain Bitcoin. His family worried about the late nights and the lines deepening beneath his eyes. They told him to get a stable job, to leave this fantasy behind. But how could he explain the pull he felt each time he saw the patterns forming on the screen, the hidden order buried in the chaos? Every failure cut deep. He invested small amounts, scraps he could afford to lose, and watched them evaporate in the violent tides of the market. Each red candle seemed to mock him, stripping away his hope with surgical precision. Yet strangely, he did not stop. Losses became scars, but scars became lessons. He began to realize that while others saw only noise, he could glimpse something more. Faint signals hidden in the madness, threads of logic tangled within the storm. One stormy evening, lightning cracking across the horizon, he sat by the window with charts glowing before him. His reflection in the glass was pale, his face hollow from sleepless nights, but his eyes were burning with conviction. He whispered to himself, almost as if making a pact with forces unseen. This will not break me. I will master it. It was a promise he carried in his bones, and though he could not yet see it, that night marked the beginning. In the shadows of failure and ridicule, the spark of the invisible trader was born. Chapter 2. Baptism by Fire. The market was not kind to beginners. It was a predator, swift and merciless, and he walked straight into its jaws. His first real attempt at trading was a disaster. He had saved carefully, put him scrimping from odd jobs, pulling together what little capital he could. With trembling hands, he entered the market, convinced he had found the perfect entry. At first, the numbers ticked upward, glowing green, filling him with a rush of triumph. But then, as quickly as they had risen, they collapsed. He sat frozen as his balance bled away before his eyes. The loss was small in absolute terms, but to him it was everything. The shock of it left him hollow. He slammed his fist against the table, the sound echoing through the cramped room. His chest tightened with anger, shame, and disbelief. How could something that felt so clear, so certain, turn so violently against him? It would have been easy to stop there, to walk away as so many others had. But something inside him hardened instead. The loss stung, but it awakened him. The market is alive, he thought. It punishes the weak. If I want to survive, I cannot remain weak. From that moment, he became a student of the battlefield. He dove deeper than ever before, not only into charts, but into the psychology of trading. He studied the whales who manipulated prices at will, the automated bots that struck faster than any human hand, and the reckless crowds who drowned in panic. The truth hit him with brutal clarity. He had entered unprepared, armed with nothing but hope. Hope was no shield. Hope was death in this world. So he began to record everything. Every trade, every decision, every mistake. He started a notebook, his private ledger of blood and lessons. Each page carried his failures, but also his discoveries. How greed whispered louder after small wins, how fear froze him before losses, how impatience always proved fatal. He learned that the market was a mirror, reflecting his weaknesses with ruthless precision. And he swore to confront those weaknesses until they no longer controlled him. Weeks later, his trades began to shift. Small gains appeared, not enough to erase the sting of earlier losses, but enough to show progress. His hands trembled less, his entries grew sharper, his exits more deliberate. One night, after closing a modestly profitable trade, he leaned back and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The glow of the screen felt different this time, warmer, less hostile. "I can do this," he said softly, not as bravado, but as revelation. His baptism by fire had scorched him, but it had not destroyed him. It had forged something stronger in its flames: resilience. Chapter 3: Whispers of the Blockchain. Long nights bled into early mornings as his world grew smaller. A desk cluttered with half-empty coffee cups, a glowing laptop, and the faint scratching of his pen across the notebook. But while his physical world shrank, his inner world expanded into realms of possibility he had never imagined. He dove into the lore of Bitcoin as if it were scripture. The mystery of Satoshi Nakamoto fascinated him endlessly. Here was an architect who had built an empire of code and vanished, leaving behind not a monument, but a living system that pulsed with life. Anonymous, incorruptible, and yet terrifying in its unpredictability. To him, Satoshi was less a man and more a myth, proof that power could exist without a name, without a face. But Bitcoin was only the beginning. Soon he stumbled into Ethereum, and with it, a vision that stretched far beyond money. It wasn't just currency, it was possibility. Smart contracts that bound agreements without lawyers, decentralized applications that bypassed governments, DAOs that rewrote how people organized. Each new idea felt like a key unlocking doors in his mind. He began consuming white papers like novels, spending hours in online forums where anonymous pioneers debated the future. Their words were strange at first: blockchains, nodes, consensus mechanisms, forks. But slowly, the jargon became language. The language became insight. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined it. Entire societies built not on trust in men, but in trust in mathematics. It was dizzying, a revolution hidden in plain sight. He was no longer just a man staring at charts. He was glimpsing the future, piece by piece. And though his trade still stumbled, though his account still bore scars, he felt something stirring inside him, the first faint outline of the invisible trader. Chapter 4: The First Taste of Victory. The breakthrough came on a quiet evening, when the air was heavy with rain and his room buzzed with the hum of his old laptop. He had been watching the markets for days, resisting every urge to jump in. His notebook was filled with scribbles, support lines, resistance levels, emotional triggers he had noted from past mistakes. Then he saw it. A pattern unfolding with uncanny precision. The kind of setup he had studied but never trusted himself enough to act on. This time, he acted, calmly, deliberately. His entry was precise, his risk measured, and then he waited. The market wavered at first, testing his patience. But slowly, the numbers began to climb. His heart raced, but he forced himself to stay still. Minutes stretched into hours, each tick of the chart a test of his discipline. By midnight, the trade had moved firmly in his favor. He closed the position and stared at the balance. For the first time, it was not smaller, not bleeding red, but larger. It wasn't fortune. It wasn't even enough to change his life. But it was real profit, born not of luck, but of patience and strategy. He leaned back in his chair, exhausted yet exhilarated. A grin spread across his face. Not wild, but quiet, controlled. The grin of a man who had wrestled chaos and emerged with a fragment of order. Still, he was cautious. He knew the market well enough to understand how victory could intoxicate. A voice whispered inside him, "Now you can win again. Now you can win bigger." That voice was a trap, he knew. Greed had ruined countless others. But that night, as rain tapped softly against the window and he finally allowed himself to sleep, he felt something he hadn't in months: hope. The invisible trader was no longer just surviving. He had tasted what it meant to win. Chapter 5: The Edge of Obsession. What had begun as curiosity now consumed him. The glow of the market charts followed him everywhere, even in dreams. The rhythm of his days was no longer tied to sunlight or clocks, but to the cycles of price swings. He ate less, spoke less, slept rarely. Meals would sit untouched as he hunched over the screen, chasing threads of data deeper into the night. Friends grew distant, their laughter fading into background noise he no longer understood. Family called him distracted, hollow, a ghost in his own home. But how could he explain to them that he felt more alive in the roar of the market than anywhere else? He told himself it was discipline. But he knew, even as he scribbled lines across charts, that discipline had curdled into obsession. His pulse quickened only when the numbers shifted, when the digital battlefield demanded his full attention. The rush was intoxicating, the surge of adrenaline as prices spiked, the crushing silence as they fell. Wins were electric, losses suffocating, but both kept him hooked. The market had become not only his teacher, but his tormentor and his lifeline. One night, as the world outside lay in silence, he caught his own reflection in the darkened window. The face staring back was pale and gaunt, shadows carved beneath his eyes, lips drawn tight. He hardly recognized himself. "This is the price," he whispered. And then, almost defiantly, he turned back to the glow of the screen. Chapter 6, Lessons in Blood. The market spared no one. It was neither friend nor foe. It was hunger itself, devouring the careless and testing the strong. And he had been careless. After a string of small wins, pride had crept in. He thought himself untouchable, thought discipline was his shield. Then came the night when the market reminded him of his place. A sudden reversal, brutal and merciless, wiped away weeks of effort in a single breath. He sat frozen, watching the red bars crash downward, his balance shrinking to nothing. Each tick downward was a blade twisting deeper. When the final liquidation hit, he pushed his chair back and buried his face in his hands. The silence of loss was heavy. It wrapped around him, colder than the night air. But even in that silence, he could not walk away. Instead, he pulled the worn notebook closer. With trembling hands, he wrote it all down. The entry, the reasoning, the emotion, the failure. A ledger of pain. Over time, page after page filled with mistakes. Yet, as the notebook thickened, so did his understanding. He saw patterns not just in the charts, but in himself. Greed that whispered louder after every win, fear that froze him before exits, impatience that dragged him into traps. Each entry was blood written in ink, but each entry also built resilience. He began to realize that the market's cruelty was also its teaching. Losses did not mean defeat, they meant lessons. By the time the notebook was half filled, he understood something vital. The greatest enemy was not the market. It was the man sitting at the desk, staring back at him in the reflection of the screen. And unless he mastered himself, he would never master anything else. Chapter 7, The Mask of Discipline. Something changed after the notebook began to fill. He no longer rushed into trades with trembling hands. He no longer panicked when prices swung violently. Slowly, carefully, he began to craft a mask, the mask of discipline. When he wore it, he became still. Wins did not swell his pride. Losses did not draw him into despair. He learned to treat both imposters the same, recording them with equal detachment, analyzing them with the cold eye of a surgeon. He stopped seeking validation in communities or forums. His trades grew quieter, invisible even to those who watched closely. He entered like a shadow, slipped out with precision, leaving no trace. Behind the mask, though, storms still raged. Doubt still whispered when he hesitated at the edge of a trade. Fear still crept in when red candles stacked higher. Greed still murmured in the back of his mind when profits tempted him to hold longer. But the difference now was simple. The market could not see it. To the world outside, he was calm, anonymous, faceless. His name meant nothing in the swarm of traders. But his mask made him dangerous. And in time, he realized something else. When you trade as if unseen, as if invisible, the market itself begins to show you more than it reveals to others. The invisible trader was not a title he chose. It was a name the mask whispered to him when he wore it long enough. Chapter 8, The Allure of the Community. For months he had lived in near isolation, his world reduced to charts, books, and the relentless battle of his own mind. But eventually, whispers of communities reached him. Hidden forums, encrypted chat rooms, circles of traders who claimed to hold keys to the market's secrets. At first, he was skeptical. Too many self-proclaimed experts shouted over one another, too many voices claiming mastery. The noise was deafening, but curiosity pushed him closer. He began lurking, reading late-night threads filled with strategies, warnings, and rumors. Most of what he found was worthless. Some advice was reckless, dangerous. Others spun tales of easy wealth that collapsed at the first test. But scattered among the noise, he found sparks of truth, fragments of insight that resonated with what he had learned through blood and loss. Cautiously, he engaged, never fully, never revealing himself. He asked questions with care, tested advice against his own charts, discarded what failed, and saved what worked. Slowly, he built a map of the collective psychology that moved markets. Fear that spread like wildfire in groups, greed that inflated bubbles, panic that triggered stampedes. The community was both gift and curse. It offered wisdom, but also distraction. If he listened too closely, he drowned in their noise. If he ignored them entirely, he risked blindness to shifts he could not see alone. Finding balance became another weapon. And though he remained nameless among them, never more than a shadow drifting through their conversations, the community sharpened him in ways solitude never could. In silence, he absorbed everything. He stayed invisible, unseen, unheard, always watching. Another layer of the invisible trader had been forged. Chapter 9: Temptations of Greed. The mask of discipline shielded him for a time, but nothing in the market was more cunning than greed. It lurked in silence, waiting for moments of triumph to whisper into his ear. Each win brought temptation. The voice was subtle at first. You could hold a little longer. You could double your position. You could take a bigger risk and win bigger still. In the communities he followed, he saw stories of traders who had staked everything and multiplied their wealth overnight. Screenshots of massive gains spread like wildfire, feeding the illusion that fortune was only one reckless step away. He told himself he was stronger now, that he had discipline. But in the small hours of the night, when his room was silent and his heart still raced from a profitable trade, the voice crept in. And one night, he listened. He went all in. The setup seemed perfect. His entry was clean, his conviction high. At first, the market rewarded him, and he felt invincible as his balance surged. His chest swelled with the intoxicating rush of victory. Then the tide turned. A single reversal tore through his position, and in minutes, everything he had gained evaporated. By the time he closed the trade, the damage was done, more painful than any loss before, because it was fueled not by ignorance, but by greed. He sat in silence, staring at the screen, the voice that had tempted him now laughing cruelly. "Never again," he muttered, his voice low but firm. It was a vow etched into his bones. The invisible trader could not afford to wear greed's chains. Chapter 10: The Rise of Patience. From that failure, patience was born. He learned to wait, even when the urge to act clawed at his insides. He studied charts not to chase movement, but to predict it. He let setups unfold slowly, resisting the urge to jump at shadows. It was torture at first. He felt useless when he wasn't trading, restless as opportunities seemed to slip past. But his notebook reminded him of every rushed entry that had ended in disaster. Slowly, he trained himself to see that inaction was not weakness, it was strength. Days would pass where he did nothing. He would sit by the screen, watching candles rise and fall, ignoring the itch to press buttons. And then, when the conditions aligned with precision, he struck. His entries grew sharper, his exits more deliberate. He risked less, but gained more. Patience became his blade. Other traders mocked him for being slow, for waiting too long. But he smiled quietly, knowing their haste was their downfall. They bled from reckless trades. He endured, steady as stone. Losses still came, but now they no longer unraveled him. He treated them as part of the process, stepping stones on the path. For every loss, there was a lesson. For every win, a reminder not to grow arrogant. The invisible trader was no longer just surviving. He was evolving. Each page of his notebook, each silent night spent waiting, carried him further from the reckless boy he had once been and closer to the shadow he was becoming. Chapter 11: Allies in the Shadows. Though he had built strength in solitude, he began to understand a hard truth. No trader truly conquered the markets alone. At first, he had resisted the idea. He had worn his invisibility like armor, proud of the silence that set him apart. But as his understanding deepened, he saw the limits of isolation. There were gaps in his knowledge, blind spots no amount of personal discipline could fill. Quietly, cautiously, he formed connections. Not friendships in the ordinary sense, but alliances forged in whispers and encrypted chats. There was the coder who showed him the hidden machinery behind trading bots, algorithms that struck with inhuman speed, manipulating order books before most traders even blinked. There was the researcher who mapped blockchain movements, tracing coins as they slipped through anonymous wallets like shadows in a labyrinth. And there was the grizzled mentor, a veteran who had weathered bubbles and crashes years before, who spoke not in grand declarations, but in warnings carved from scar tissue. They were scattered across the world, strangers bound by nothing but the markets. They rarely used real names, sometimes not even real voices. Their trust was measured, their words cautious. Yet their knowledge sharpened him in ways solitude never could. He remained invisible among them, never fully revealing himself. But in their fragmented guidance, he saw reflections of the future he sought. The invisible trader was no longer only one man against the storm. He was part of a constellation of shadows, each shining faintly in the darkness, each strengthening the others by their silent presence. Chapter 12, The Storm of Volatility. The market had always been unpredictable, but now he saw it for what it truly was. A storm, wild and merciless, a force that swallowed the unprepared without hesitation. Volatility terrified most traders. For them, it was chaos, accounts liquidated, balances destroyed in minutes. But for him, volatility became opportunity. It was the forge where discipline proved its worth. He remembered one night with particular clarity. The market had been calm for weeks, prices holding steady like a breath drawn in. Then, without warning, the crash came. Screens across the world glowed red. Entire communities erupted in panic. Traders screamed into the void as coins they had clung to tumbled into freefall. Liquidation swept through exchanges like tidal waves, wiping out months of effort in seconds. He did not move at first. He waited, calm in the face of hysteria. His notebook sat open before him, pages marked with lessons learned from countless nights like this. Panic was predictable, and predictability was opportunity. When the prices bottomed out, when fear drowned out reason, he struck. He bought into the chaos, not recklessly, but with deliberate precision. Days later, as the market clawed its way back upward, his position grew with it. Where others had lost everything, he had taken from the storm. For him, volatility was no longer terror. It was rhythm. Dangerous, yes, but a rhythm he had learned to dance to. The invisible trader had become something more than a survivor. He was a stormwalker, moving with the tides that destroyed others, turning chaos into his craft. Chapter 13, The Enemy in the Mirror. He had studied the market until its movements felt like second nature. He had tracked whales, learned from veterans, and wielded patience like a weapon. Yet for all the discipline he had gained, one truth refused to fade. The fiercest enemy was never the market. It was always himself. Late at night, when the room was silent and the charts flickered faintly, doubt would creep in. Was his strategy strong enough? Had he waited too long? Was the setup slipping away while he sat motionless? Fear whispered one moment, greed shouted the next. His mind was a battlefield far more relentless than the exchange. He remembered the times he had listened to those voices, the desperate trades made out of panic, the reckless bets fueled by arrogance. The notebook was filled with scars of those battles, every mistake etched in ink to remind him of his own weaknesses. He leafed through its pages often, tracing old notes with a weary finger. At first, the notebook had been a ledger of pain, but now it was also proof of evolution. Each entry showed him the man he had once been and the shadow he was becoming. Yet still, the mirror taunted him. Each morning, the reflection of tired eyes and clenched jaw forced him to face the truth. The invisible trader was not fully born until he conquered that reflection. The market storms could be predicted, but mastering himself, that was the true test. Chapter 14, The Final Gambit. Rumors rippled through the communities, subtle at first, but growing louder. A massive event was coming, a shift that could make or break fortunes overnight. For weeks, he prepared. He read every whisper of news, studied every unusual movement in wallets, every ripple across the charts. His allies in the shadows dropped hints, each piece of information a puzzle he carefully assembled. He planned like a general before battle. His strategy was not reckless, not desperate. Every risk was calculated, every scenario mapped out. He had learned too much to gamble blindly. When the moment came, the market erupted into frenzy. Prices surged with violence, crashed without mercy, then surged again. Communities lit up with panic and hope in equal measure. Accounts were wiped clean in the chaos. But he remained steady. His entry was precise, his position deliberate. He held not with arrogance, but with conviction. For hours he rode the storm, his mask of discipline unbroken, as the market clawed wildly around him. When the dust settled, he emerged not untouched. No one left a storm without scars, but victorious. His balance was larger than it had ever been. His confidence was sharper, cleaner, no longer tainted by greed or fear. It was not luck. It was the culmination of everything. The nights of obsession, the scars of failure, the lessons in patience, the allies. The storm survived. This was the final gambit, the one that confirmed what he had always whispered to himself in silence. The invisible trader had risen. Chapter 15, Legacy of the Invisible Trader. The market never rested. Even in moments of quiet, its pulse thrummed across the globe, alive in the glow of countless screens. Prices rose, crashed, and rose again, indifferent to those who celebrated or wept at its movements. For him, this truth had become a kind of peace. He no longer chased every shift, no longer burned with the fever that once consumed him. He had fought his battles, endured his storms, and learned the rhythm of the tides. The hunger that once kept him chained to the screen had transformed into something steadier, not obsession, but mastery. He had walked through fire. He had faced ruin and clawed his way back. He had learned that the fiercest battles were never with charts, whales, or bots, but with the reflection staring back at him each morning. Fear, greed, impatience, those were the true predators, and only by taming them had he risen. The name Invisible Trader was never something he proclaimed. It was something he became. A shadow that moved quietly through the market, unseen yet undeniable. To the outside world, he was no one, another nameless participant lost in the storm. But in the silence of his craft, he knew he had carved a place that would outlast recognition. He closed his notebook for the final time, its pages swollen with years of mistakes and victories, blood and lessons. The ledger was complete. Not because the journey was over, the market had no end, but because he no longer needed the record. The lessons were etched into him now, inseparable from who he was. As the screens flickered with life, as prices shifted, and traders across the world shouted into the noise, he felt calm. He had risen, not as a conqueror seeking glory, but as a survivor who had learned to walk the storm. The invisible trader would remain unseen, but his legacy was clear. Resilience, patience, discipline. A shadow in the chaos, unyielding, unforgettable. The end. Season 1 of Cryptocurrency Chronicles, The Rise of the Invisible Trader, comes to a close, not with fireworks of fortune, but with the steady glow of lessons learned. Across 15 chapters, the invisible trader's journey revealed that the true path of survival in the markets is neither quick wealth nor reckless daring, but patience, the discipline to wait, the courage to endure losses, and the wisdom to see each failure as a stepping stone toward mastery. His scars became his greatest teachers, reminding us that no one should leap blindly into trading without first learning the craft, studying the rhythms, and understanding the storms that lie ahead. For those who dream of navigating this volatile world, let his story serve as both warning and inspiration. Before you risk capital, invest in knowledge, for resilience begins with preparation. And if this is your first time here, kindly like, follow, and subscribe to get more content like this, or even better.